presence of a quorum, I'm calling to order the meeting of the Regional School Committee on Tuesday, October 12th at 6:31 p.m. And we'll start with a roll call attendance. Please state present when I call your name. Mr. Demling?
Demling present.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington present.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny present.
Ms. Lord?
Lord present.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer present.
Mr. Stammel?
Stammel present.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer present.
And McDonald present. And we also have our recorder, Ms. Scott, and Dr. Morris joining us this evening. And we are being broadcast live on Amherst Media. First up is approval of minutes, and we have two sets of minutes to approve. I'm going to note that the minutes are available for the school committee members to be able to review and discuss, and I will share my screen so that the public can also see what we're reviewing. Once we've approved the minutes will be available publicly on the meeting of the date. So if we're looking at September 23rd minutes, then you'll be able to find the minutes there after they're approved on the September 23rd meeting in the website. So I'm just going to pull them up so I can share my screen. We are looking first at September 23rd. Did anyone have any edits or comments on this agenda? Ms. Kenny?
I was there for the vote on approval of the retreat minutes. I don't think my name is listed under the yays.
You are correct. Any other edits? Mr. Demling?
I just want to say to Ms. Scott, these are excellent minutes. Been really impressed with your work so far. It's been a great resource for me, and I'm sure what the public is interested in watching our meetings or catching up on meetings. So thank you very much for your work.
I'm just going to scroll slowly so that folks can see. They are comprehensive, so I would second Mr. Demling's comments. So I'm not seeing any other edits. Okay, so I will move that we approve the minutes of September 23rd, 2021 with that as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by McDonald, seconded by Stammel, and we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, aye.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, aye.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Mr. Stammel?
Stammel, aye.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
And McDonald, aye. The motion passes unanimously. And now we'll look at the minutes of September 28th. And again, I will share my screen. Are there any edits? I'm seeing none. So with that, I'll move that we approve the minutes of Tuesday, September 28th. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by McDonald, second by Demling. And we'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, I.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, I.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Mr. Stammel?
Stammel, aye.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, I.
And McDonald, aye. The motion passes unanimously. Next up, sorry, I'm just trying to close that. Next up is public comment. And this evening we have one written and no voice messages. So I will share my screen for the one written. This document is on board docs and available for the public. So folks may navigate to the video on their own if they choose. So with that, we will move on to Superintendent's update. And I'll turn that over to you, Dr. Morris.
Thank you. A couple of things for this evening. One is that I want to share appreciation for Town of Amherst. We're looking at multiple places to be able to help us, but we believe that the Town of Amherst will be able to help us with vaccine clinics on site, similar to what we did last year, and especially given what the Board of Health and then eventually the school committee worked on in terms of a mandate at the regional level. Being able to do it on site is great. And we, they are doing it at the Bank Center. We had another conversation actually after our last meeting. So we're working on details and timing now, but I think probably towards the end of this month, we'll do the first shot clinic, and a couple weeks later, a second shot clinic for folks here. So much appreciation for that support. The second item, just the high school and Summit Academy had their open house last week on Thursday. It went really well. It's virtual, so there's always going to be technical things that come up from time to time. Sam Cameron in particular deserves a lot of credit, assistant principal there, for problem solving and troubleshooting live as the open house was getting started, but appreciate everyone's work on that, and staff members did a phenomenal job of promoting two-way dialogue with families in the community. Third thing is appreciation for our facilities department and our effort to maintain outdoor lunches as long as possible. If you drive by the high school, you may see there's a lot of, and the middle school, there's a lot of tents that didn't used to be there. And they're the kind of more modest size ones, and which is nice in terms of flexibility, durability if we need to move them. But they worked, with principals to figure out best locations, and as we're trying to maintain, again, outdoor eating as much as possible, except in days of inclement weather, it really helps for some folks to have those tents up. And so we appreciate the work that the facilities department has done on that. I mean, it's a lot of tents. It's outside my office in middle school, I don't know, it's like 10, 12 tents out in addition to the original one. So, and some kids like to be under them. Some kids like to feel the sun, especially as the weather gets cooler. And so we have lots of options for kids, and I think that's a good thing. And my last update is those of you who travel often to www.arps.org will notice thereabouts in about 10 days, less than 2 weeks, we'll have a makeover. And at first it'll be a more cosmetic makeover, but over time it'll also include more differences, ease of use, flexibility in finding information. We're doing some of those simultaneous, but it's a little easier from a workflow perspective to do the cosmetic change first and the organizational change first, and then fill in the rest of the details. But if you open up on the 22nd or 23rd and you go to arps.org and it looks really different, you're still on the right place. It's just an update and rebranding. And then the couple weeks after that, we'll fill out some of the kind of more content-based pieces. But thanks to Jerry Champagne, Sasha Figueroa for working on that. I know they're in meetings as recently as this afternoon with our vendor, trying to fine-tune what that looks like. But I think it'll give a much more positive impression of our district. So appreciate the work going into that. And that's my update for the evening.
I, for one, am excited to see the new update. So that's great work. I think it'll be much appreciated by many. Any other comments or questions? Ms. Kenny?
I wanted to echo your thanks to the town of Amherst. I had asked if there would be able to be another vaccine clinic, and I really appreciate everybody working together to make that happen. That's great news.
Any other questions for Dr. Morris? No? Okay. Next up is the chair's update, and I don't have an update right now. I will move on to the school committee announcements. Are there any announcements from committee members? Mr. Demling.
I have 4. I'll try to make this quick. I had the opportunity to testify at the Joint Committee of Education the other week in support of a bill that Senator Comerford is sponsoring to remove MCAS as a graduation requirement and to explore alternative methods for student assessment. You may remember last December, our committee passed a resolution calling for exploration of alternative methods as well as moratorium on the MCAS. It was a really great experience to see so much support from such a broad cross-section of educators. I spoke a few people after Max Page, who's the vice president of the MTA, also ARPS graduate, I believe, and Amherst resident. Obviously there's a number of issues that we've haven't been in total harmony with teachers unions in the past. So it was really great to be at an event where we are aligned, and it was a reminder of how much we are aligned on. So that was really great. I hope that has some traction. I also got a chance to testify to the Rural Schools Commission recently. This is a committee that has been put together to look at issues related to low and declining enrollment school districts like ourselves in Western Mass. And so it's chaired by Senator Hines, who's the well-known senator out in the Berkshires, who is the one who got the rural schools aid line that we benefit from. And Natalie Blay, who represents Leverett and Tewksbury, is also on this commission, has done a lot of work for that. And it was again a really great group talking about these issues and how when we lose enrollment, we don't gain back our per pupil spending, exactly like the charter school formula, right? Because of the economy of scale, and talk about hold harmless aid, and we even got into assessment methods a little bit if you want to get really wonky. So it was really great. So I hope that group has some good recommendations at the end. Another Joe thing. So if you feel that the holiday that we just celebrated should be Indigenous Peoples Day in all of Massachusetts, is a very easy thing you can do that is pretty effective. If you go to Joe Comerford's Facebook page, she's got a post of the people you can email by this Friday in support of her bill to change this at the state level. Our school districts obviously changed this years ago. We were in full support. There's no reason for it to be named after that awful human being anymore. So there was some powerful testimony recently on that. And so I'm really hopeful on that. And the fourth thing is we had our second CPAC meeting of the year recently. We had a great discussion on inclusion and how broad-reaching an idea that is. This may come up in our superintendent goals discussion, but when we talk about those broad every year themes, right, like combating racism and closing the achievement gap, and inclusion is one of those things that touches almost everything we do, and is we're never going to get to a point where we say, okay, we're done, where inclusion is over, right? And so it was a great discussion. Nick Yaffe, a principal from elementary school in the Amherst district, was there. He had some really good feedback. And so CPAC is taking that as one of their focuses this year, and trying to see what can be practically achieved in a year, but keep that theme going. So I hope to share more on that, and keep the committee informed on those discussions.
Thank you. I will share that the policy subcommittee is planning to meet next week on Monday evening at 6:30. Is the budget subcommittee meeting?
Sure. The budget subcommittee will be meeting next Tuesday at 6:30.
Any other announcements? I'm not seeing any. Okay. Great. We will move on now to new and continuing business. And as Dr. Morris emailed us, we've added one agenda item we've added it second on this agenda for tonight on pooled testing. That was announced this afternoon at the state level and requires attention within days, so well before our next meeting. So this is topics unforeseen within 48 hours. But first, we are going to start with the discussion about a possible addition of adding a 6th grade to the middle school. I think Dr. Morris mentioned this already in his update, but the Amherst School Committee met last week and voted affirmatively to move its 6th grade to the middle school pending a positive vote, a similar vote here at the Regional School Committee. That by no means means that we need to take a vote this evening. And I think I'll let Dr. Morris talk through a little bit about process and consideration from our perspective as the Regional Committee. But I just wanted to share that update. So like I said, there is a proposed motion in our agenda item, but that it's a possible vote. So if we need a little bit more time, we can have that. So I'll look to Dr. Morris to explain a little bit more about the process and what we'll be talking about tonight.
Yeah, so I think I'll give an update town by town. Shutesbury is the only town I don't have an update in. So Mr. Sullivan, please jump in. So I think just giving a sense of what I've heard from the elementary committees, all of them, I think is a fair way. I know Ms. McDonald spoke to Amherst. And then I'd like to transition to talk about the regional implications so that you could look at it as a regional committee. But I think the elementary context matters because we wouldn't be all talking about it if the elementary schools all were ignoring this possibility. So as Ms. McDonald said, the Amherst Elementary School Committee voted last week pending a vote of the region to move their 6th graders to the middle school building in 2023 for the fall. So not next year, but the year after. In Leverett, I was supposed to be there last Monday, but then I got asked to come at a future date, which I think just got reached for the 27th of this month. So I think I'll give an update and see what the committee there wants to do. I'm just going in alphabetical order, by the way, Steve. I'm not discounting Shutesbury. Over in Pelham, we had a discussion. I think Ms. Kenny summarized it well last time, which is a bit of a wait and see approach to re-engage, likely a year from now or so, once the kind of organization and schedule of what 6th grade in the middle school would look like potentially is established so that they can consider what they'd like to do in Pelham. And in Shutesbury, I haven't been contacted by the committee members. Steve, I don't know if it's okay with the chair, if you wanted to jump in with the thoughts of anyone in Shutesbury, I think that'd be helpful to know that context.
Yeah, Shutesbury is not even interested in talking about it, so they have no interest at this point at all of even considering it. And I think that's for the long term, not just for the first year.
Yeah. And that was a sense I got, but I know you were much closer to it. So I appreciate Mr. Sullivan sharing that with us. From the regional level, just transitioning, what this means now is no town slated to intend to send their children, their 6th graders to the middle school next year. But we do have at least one committee that is interested and has kind of publicly stated their vote or publicly voted to do that pending this group's vote for 2023. In terms of implications for the middle school, one of the advantages actually of 2023 as opposed to next year is there's a significant drop of enrollment if you look at our elementary district. So we already know, even at a higher enrollment a couple of years ago when we had that study done, there's enough space in our middle school where we wouldn't need to add space for 6th graders to come to the middle school building. And really the implications are twofold. One, financially, it'd be a benefit that over time we are going to have to work on a rental agreement between whoever comes and the region for use of space and potentially use of staff. In terms of some shared staff, like the nurse is the one that comes to mind most often. We wouldn't have a full-time nurse for just the 6th grade. It's just not enough kids. But whoever's in the role of nurse would have to, be supported by both the region and Amherst, at least, because Amherst is the one that's publicly expressed its support for this. I think the second implication are really about programming. To me, this is actually a huge benefit that I think it's exciting to, and I shared this at some other committee meetings in public, I think it's exciting to utilize this time that we have, a year and 3/4, to re-envision what we want the middle school to be. Even if your town isn't sending students, 6th grade students to the middle school, kind of re-envisioning that and working on alignment would be a good thing. We work on alignment as much as we can between the 6th grades and the 4 elementary districts at the current time. So it's not really a shift that way, but I do think that opportunity, sometimes you do need an external force to push you to re-envision and reimagine what we want a school to be or an organization to be. And I think our middle school does a great job now, but to me, this is a benefit. So from the regional level, I'll be honest, I don't really see a lot of downside. I see a financial, probably not a huge, but a financial upside. And any financial upside to the region is always a good thing because we know the region has unique challenges in terms of how it's funded by the 4 towns and the assessment formula and a bunch of things we'll start spending a lot of time on in the next couple of months in terms of assessment formulas and finances. And I think educationally, I think there really is a benefit. I think there's an economy of scale challenge that we've had at the middle school that, we would think about elective teachers and programming. This would bring in a need, for instance, to look and really follow through on the makerspace that we've been talking about for years here. Find some of the stimulus funding to also, spruce up some wayfinding. We did some of that work even last summer. So if you've seen the middle school, it's very bright in terms of the colors. And if can look in the front door, you could see there's a lot more colors and there's more of that work needs to happen. So I do think external pushes will help us in that dimension. So from my personal view, I don't see a lot of downside from the region. Frankly, I don't see any downside. I see both financial upside and educational upside from the regional perspective. From the elementary school perspective, I shared different things because at the committee meetings I'm invited to, because I do think that's I think there's different pros and cons at the elementary level, but from the regional level, I really do think this is a win-win. But that's my opinion. And as Ms. McDonald said, there's a potential vote tonight, but certainly I think it's very reasonable for the committee to want to ask questions tonight, hear about it, and come back in 2 weeks and vote then. I think that won't hold up anybody, in my opinion, or my perspective is that'd be, a fine timeline as well.
And we'll open it up to questions. Mr. Stammel.
Yeah, at our meeting, we had initial discussions about this, and one thought that came up in question is if a town like Leverett, for example, chooses not to send 6th graders to the middle school, and let's say all 3 towns chose that, then in 7th grade, our kids would be among probably 20% of the 7th graders who were in that cohort. So most of the 6th graders would have already been in the middle school, and the districts that chose not to would be sending kids to the 7th grade. And so we have concerns. We're hoping that Dr. Morris and others will think about how they'll be best integrated, because that really changes. These kids will have already had in the middle school a year to bond and form relationships. And so the feeding districts will be that much more, I think, in the minority. And I don't know, I was thinking, could it be part of the goal, one of your goals that we could modify or add? But that was one of the concerns voiced.
Dr. Morris.
Yeah, luckily I get to lean on your other person you work with, Superintendent Colkeen, who has this experience in her current district where she sends, not in Leverett, but in one of her districts, I should say, where they send students to the middle school in Mahar at 7th grade, where the rest of the students attend in 6th grade. And they've worked out systems, and her opinion is there were things to work out, but they worked out very well. So I lean on her expertise on this and will if this moves forward. I think we also heard from Mr. Sullivan pretty clearly where Shutesbury sits. So I think the odds of Leverett being the only town to not send 6th graders seems low. I mean, I think for Amherst, those students already know each other and go to school together. So I don't want to minimize the concern. I do think it's something that we absolutely need to pay attention to about what's the onboarding at 2 different grade levels. But I think we've got a successful model, and I'm lucky that I get to work with Superintendent Colkeen on many things. But this would be one where she said they've really been able to work this out, and it's a very successful model they have up there.
Ms. Lord.
Yes, thank you. I've heard from some people a concern about the physical readiness of the building. And are we looking into maybe repairing it or getting it more prepared if it needs to be more prepared for the increase in students?
Dr. Morris?
Yeah, so I think in terms of physical readiness, I think a lot of it's about, again, the electives, those types of things. We will, when we get to capital and some things we're working on with the town of Amherst, be talking about, Makerspace and expanding that area. We have the roof, we have the funds, the region has already funded the roof. We're just keeping our fingers crossed that MSB will pay half of that, so we don't have to charge all $3 million to the regional schools. So I think we do have a lot of things in place, but I think that's the other advantage of taking a little more time here. Then it is hard, as I've expressed a couple of times in different contexts, to work on things, especially from a facilities perspective, when they're working on health and safety all the time. So I think having that extra year instead of going forward next fall allows us the time to solve kind of physical plant things that have been hard to solve because we've been so focused on COVID. And I think that's really went into some of the recommendation I made and the eventual vote of the Amherst School Committee to not push to do this next year, but to do it the year after. But it's, again, not at all to minimize the concern. I think it's a very real concern. And I don't think I think it's a concern no matter who comes, right? That we want to, if our physical plant's not good, if you're a Leverett 7th grader, we want to make sure that the Amherst 6th graders who come don't negatively impact the physical plant needs for the 7th grader. So I don't see that as I think that's a very purely regional question. And I think it's a good one and something we need to attend to.
I think related to that, you mentioned this a little bit in terms of the capital funding. So I'm not going to repeat that because I think you just answered that question. But could you talk a little bit more about sort of what you see as the upsides and educationally? I scribbled Makerspace, but what are some of the other things that come to mind or highlights just from a middle school experience perspective that this move would enable?
Yeah, so one of the challenges that our middle school teachers will face every year is that they have students coming from a range of different districts who are using a range of different curricula. Most curricula, almost all curricula is a 6 through 8 curricula because it's the predominant grade span of middle schools in this, both the state and as well as the country. And so they face real challenges. And when they have students for 2 years in the same building, students are coming in 7th grade, getting acclimated, and then they're ready to leave at the end of 8th grade. And that creates some real curricular challenges and alignment challenges. And so having at least the bulk of students in one spot allows us to really align the work. It also allows us to offer different extracurriculars that aren't always possible at the elementary school level, and align our elective offerings as well. I mean, in terms of some of the music and art, those pieces, the drama program here, all those things, it is hard in a 2-year span. The more years that we have for students to be engaged in the work, the more consistent the curriculum is, and the better that is for kids. And I think finally, having an opportunity, as I sort of referenced earlier, to re-envision what we want, what would 6th grade look like for any of the member towns who come, allows us to really situate what does it mean for 7th and 8th grade to have at least the majority of our middle school kids in the building at the 6th grade level. And I think there's a real benefit to that, not just in terms of alignment and curriculum, but from a developmental point of view, to think about the building as a middle grade. I think Allison, you're on the middle school grade span advisory. Is think about it not a middle school, but it's about the middle grades. It's about adolescence and the beginning of adolescence, and developmentally to approach that. Having 6th graders there, I think, is a benefit to the building. I think when students get to 7th grade and they're new to the building and they're there for such a short time period, it's hard to develop that programming that we would ideally like from a social emotional perspective. And having 6th graders there, I think, allows for more time. It allows us not to rush in the same way that, I feel like we have when you only have 2 years. There's an intensity to it. And we really want that kind of arc to be a little longer to be a little more deliberate over time. So those are some of the benefits that I see, not just for the 6th graders, but for the 7th and 8th grade staff as well.
Thank you.
And that wasn't a pitch for any committee, Steve, who doesn't want to send their 6th graders to not send their 6th graders. I fully respect the autonomy, particularly in the 2 districts that I have no official role in. So please know there's no coercion from my end.
Ms. Kenny.
So I have a couple of questions, which maybe you don't have answers for yet, and that's fine. So first, I don't know what is Makerspace. It's been referred to a few times. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, no, I apologize. It's I've been on I've been with this committee so long, but I sometimes forget that people change. So a while back, a makerspace is generally it means different things, and it's not the best term that way. But in general, it's kind of a 21st century woodshop, often with technology integrated. So it's a place where people can have projects, work with their hands, be involved in that kind of work. So we have a lovely space for it right now. It's not situated in a way where it'd be safe for students to enter. It's been used by a lot by facility staff, but for those of you who went to this middle school, at least one person who went to this middle school, it's that same wood shop that existed, and a lot of the equipment is still in fabulous shape. It has the outlets on the ceiling, so if you need to use either technology or tools, it has that. And so as part of the grade span study that was done by the architects, they talked about what you would need to do to bring that to code, and to allow for more, there you go, Sullivan showing off, allow for more hands-on projects. So that's been a long-term interest. We actually had that in the budget pre-pandemic at the regional level, and then the pandemic hit and we had to remove it. So our plan would be to use some pandemic relief funds to expand our programming in that area along with this change. So it's a pretty neat space. Some of you may have been in it as adults, not just as middle school students, and there's a lot of potential and there's a lot of interest in our community. We don't have some of the programming that we used to have around woodshop, around, again, some practical, applicable kinds of courses. And so the idea is to try to integrate that more in along with the change. So even though it'd be kind of billed and funded as part of this kind of larger COVID piece, there'd be a benefit to 7th and 8th grade students potentially of having access to courses that they don't currently have access to. But I'm sorry, I just slipped over that, when I mentioned Makerspace quickly. So thank you for the question.
No problem. So that it's not usable functioning space currently.
Not for children.
Programs are not through COVID.
We can't use it because not everything's up to what you would want from a safety code right now, because when it was built, it was a long time ago. So students were, right, you could all, probably a lot of us in this call had woodshop in a room that wasn't just Amherst, that if you looked at now, you'd be like, that's not safe for kids, right? And they're right. And so a lot of the work that, JCJ did in terms of costing it out would be, what would you do to make it safe space? And some is just fire code, frankly, like egress points, and there's some core stuff that's not even about the machines. It's just, you can't have kids in a space where there's not 2 points of exit and those pieces. So they drew up some basic designs. So if we do move forward, we'd have to get builder in to be able to make those modifications. They still would leave some space in the back, but it's a huge room. So even if we split, I think it was roughly in half, or maybe a little more like 2/3. It's still much larger than I think any other classroom we'd have in the middle school.
Okay. And then, so just as far as the nitty gritty, where would the 6th graders be separate from the 7th and 8th graders? I mean, that's how you said there was not going to be building of a new wing or separate space, right? So, I mean, it's a circle, right? Or a square. Rectangle. Yeah. Whatever. Okay. But not separate.
Right. So that's, in the original design that group came up with, 6th grade had their own hallway. They had their own bathroom. So it wasn't, if we wanted to spend millions of dollars, you can create these kind of neat nooks and everything. But I think where no one is considering doing that, just because of the finances, but it was to create some separation. So it would involve staff moving rooms. But when we looked at downstairs, there's just not enough classroom size spaces. Because I know some interest of having a different floor, but you sort of run up against 2 or 3 classrooms short. And that's, you can't do that. Kids need to be in school, and having sixth graders trudge up and, go up and down was the opposite of what we wanted. We wanted them to have their own identity in their own hallway. And so when I speak about wayfinding signs and kind of updates and modifications, it's really trying to deliberately denote where sixth graders are so that they have their own identity that is separate from seventh and eighth grade.
Yeah, I'm just going to interrupt. I think there were maps and of some of the options. I'm not saying this just for you, Ms. Kenny, but for the public as well, just as a reminder, because I'm sure this is a question on other people's minds too. But in the report and Dr. Morris's presentation, there were links to that there from those facility studies. There were some maps of different ways or approaches for integrating sixth grade into that building.
Okay, I will go back and look at those, because right now, while seventh and eighth graders don't have a bunch of classes together, they're still all commingling in the hallway, right? So that would not be the case anymore.
Yeah, so I can show the initial map, not that this
That'd
is
be
the
great.
final, but let me just display my screen. Give me 1 second. And just to get a taste, because I think it's just helpful to, even for me, to look back and see it. So there we go. I'll try to zoom in a little bit so it's a little more visible. So in this one model, you could see the sixth grade are all in this wing up here. And then seventh grade and eighth grade, they have more than one hallway, right? They have like a hallway and a half. But a lot of the rooms were put, kind of the pink rooms, or some specialized rooms to really create a buffer so that sixth grade had this whole hallway with its own bathroom and some degree of separation. I know when you're looking at a map, it doesn't, like if you walk it, you feel it a lot more than when you look at a map. But I think, we had the advisory group literally do that, walk it and take a look and see what it felt like. And this was where we sort of landed in terms of having sixth grade have its own unique space. So, and I can send you this presentation so you can take a look again, but this isn't, just to be clear, this isn't a final, like this is where they're going to be, but I think it was a model after lots of discussion with the advisory board of saying, where could they be? Where could they have enough separation, but not be so isolated that to be completely off from the rest of the building? And that's what, when we talk to other middle schools, a lot of times this is the model. It's, you want the right amount of separation, but you do want sixth graders to feel like they go to a middle school and not that they're like, sort of in a 1-year nest that's, separated from all the other students in the building.
Okay, thank you. This is helpful. So I feel like I have a lot of peppery questions to bombard people with, because while I appreciate that it is good for the regional district as a, not business entity, but I'm not sure how to say it otherwise. I worry about our kids, and I know that some sixth graders are super ready and it would be a great thing for them. And I also am aware that Amherst has a space issue, but I care about the kids. And so I have concern about what that transition will look like. The end of fifth grade, they're still pretty little. And at the end of eighth grade, they're really big. And even in busing, right, beginning of sixth grade is a lot different, and they'll still be on the bus with kids that are, 17, 18. And that's a really, really big swing. It's a lot different than kindergartners to sixth graders. And so I see that there are potential upsides, but I feel great concern for the kids that won't be ready, and that this, making that transition is already really hard. And making all of the physical transitions in your own personal body between fifth and sixth grade is already really, really hard. So adding some other piece feels like maybe too much. So I think it can be somebody else's turn to have opinions and questions. But
I think we'll move on, and if you have more, then we can come back after others have had a chance to speak. Maybe you can congeal your thoughts a little. Ms. Stancer.
So I don't know today how, if at all, the 6th grade curriculum in the 3 outlying towns aligns with the 6th grade curriculum in the Amherst elementary schools. And I'm wondering how that might be handled if you're from Pelham, say, if we chose not to send 6th graders, how is what their preparation for going into the middle school going to be, and how is that going to align with actually going into the school with children who've already been sort of through a preparation process? I'm a little concerned, I guess, about that aspect.
Dr. Morris?
Yeah, I mean, candidly, I don't see how that's particularly different than the current situation. So I think our 4 sending districts aren't fully aligned on their curriculum. I think that's a fair statement, And so I think if Amherst, in the scenario you talk about where Amherst 6th grade students attend the middle school, I don't see that as substantively changing the alignment or lack thereof between 6th grade students and our 4-member towns. I think you'd still have the same sort of dynamic, I mean, it's not like new teachers are coming in to do this. It'd be, 6th grade teachers from Amherst teaching Amherst students in 6th grade located in the middle school. I think, again, there's upsides to that curriculum alignment. I think I've already spoken to that, but I think the issue that you cite is not going to be solved or worsened by where 6th graders are located. It's an issue. I'm with you. It's an issue, but I don't see the physical location being the issue. I think it's a broader issue about local control.
Okay, I just really didn't understand how the four towns deal with the alignment in the 6th grade. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm smiling because of Steve's reaction, because I think his reaction's spot on. It's not something that we have successfully resolved. And I don't think this will, either whatever way this goes, I don't think it will be a huge factor in resolving it.
Mr. Sullivan, and then Mr. Stammel.
Yeah, I'm laughing because, we did away with the POWs and the IMP math, and Amherst chose a math program that now starts with the 6th grade and runs up through. So they've already got the advantage of the math. And unless any other town wants to join with that same program, we're already behind. But I just say that Lawrence O'Brien, a former chair of this committee, and we survived a middle school that was 6 through 8. And as far as I want to thank Dr. Morris for mentioning the Makerspace and the woodshop, and not just saying that the Makerspace was for 3D printers and such things, because I held up this car earlier, and this is one that Shannon made when she was in the 8th grade, when what they did was they took the Cub Scout Pinewood Derby and turned it into it was on steroids. They spent 4 weeks dissecting how cars go fast. It was a whole physics lesson. And the same thing happened with the bridge building. The bridge building that 6th graders do was expanded to it was over a month long, and it was amazing, the process and what they learned. And so I'm really happy that you mentioned that we may be going back in that direction and not just maker spaces with 3D printers.
Mr. Stammel, and then Mr. Demling.
Yeah, I was just thinking I somewhat disagree with Mike's assessment of that there won't be much of a change curriculum-wise, because the way I see it, middle school teachers are certified in subject areas. For example, I know that our 6th grade teacher, for example, doesn't have that certification in any subject area, so she would not be able to teach there. So I assume that the curriculum, when taught by teachers who are certified in subject areas, kind of gets a little boost. I mean, I might be wrong. I would assume those sixth grade curriculum would be a step up from sixth grade curriculum at elementary schools in Amherst also. So, and so while I'm very much in between about the whole situation, I don't have the same concerns about busing that are legitimate. I just don't share them too much. I do think the curriculum is a very interesting and maybe challenging area.
Dr. Morris?
Yeah, just one note on that. I think you're right. I'm glad you pointed that out. I think our situation in Amherst is that in sixth grade, they already do move. Most of the teachers teach not 4 subjects, so the kids do switch classes. Usually it's in 2s or 3s, right? So like, they don't switch the same way, you're right, the middle school does, where there's 1 subject taught by 1 teacher. It's much more 2 subjects by 1 teacher or 3 subjects by 1 teacher. But the model, frankly, could more or less stay the same for the Amherst staff members because of the difference in sixth grade. But I think you're right, and I'm really glad you mentioned it, because I think for the other towns where there is only 1 sixth grade teacher, we'd have to rethink that. So I'm glad you raised that point, and I apologize for omitting that.
I see the other hands, but I just want to ask a clarifying question, because I feel like we sort of go back and forth talking about sixth grade from the elementary school committee's perspective, as opposed to staying in the region and all keeping our regional hats on. And I just want to, and when it comes to curriculum and talking about sort of the curricular impacts in adding sixth grade to the middle school, is the curriculum for those sixth graders of whichever town sends them managed and governed by their sending district or by the regional district at that point, because they're now housed in the building? I think that will help us understand sort of our way into this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I'm not proposing, nor have I heard any school committee member in any of the 4 towns propose changing the regional agreement. If you do, we can have that conversation, but that's not what I've heard. What I've heard is an interest in renting space, but still maintaining governance of sixth grade students, even if they're located in a different site. So in terms of curriculum pieces and all that, I think there are some benefits, as I've spoken about, for 7th and 8th grade. But in terms of who determines the sixth grade model and curriculum, it would still be determined by the elementary district unless the regional agreement shifts. And I mean, if folks want to have that conversation, certainly I'm open to it. But that's not what I'm proposing to start. Because I can get into that if people would like.
So said another way, when we're thinking about educational impacts in the middle school, it's about how do 7th and 8th graders benefit from having sixth grade potentially in the building. And particularly if a district chooses not to send their sixth graders, how does it impact their 7th and 8th grade experience? And I see you nodding, so I'm saying like that is the conversation that we should be having here, is from the 7th and 8th grade perspective. And just going back to how you answered the question originally, it's that because of the greater number of students in the room and in the building, and the addition of a makerspace, it opens up opportunity for additional elective courses and extracurricular, as well as a new way of thinking about sort of that social emotional development arc of their time there. I don't know if that helped anybody sort of thinking, but it is challenging to sort of remind ourselves to sort of look at this from one angle versus another. And tonight we're all wearing our region hats. Mr. Sullivan, did you still have your hand up or no? Okay, Mr. Demling and then Ms. Spitzer.
Yeah, so it's a good conversation. So I want to go back to the point that Ms. Kenny brought up about concerns about sixth graders and their transition and all that. And like the way that I think about this from a regional perspective is that I share most of those concerns that Ms. Kenny articulated. And we talked, so I also serve in the Amherst School Committee, which is pre-K to 6, that voted to send 6th here if we vote that. And we had those issues come up many times. And we had multiple meetings on it, surveys, a lot of public comment, really good discussions. And I won't go into all the details and all the sub-details and related items. But it was really important to us on that committee because we were concerned, our focus was on, what is best for our 6th graders. And so that's how we framed that discussion. And so that's why we focused on it there. Now that I'm on the region, I obviously still care about those 6th graders, right? And I also care about the 6th graders in Pelham and Leverett and Shutesbury. However, I just think from a scoping this vote point of view, what our sort of jurisdiction and like scope is the 7th and 8th impact. And it feels weird because it's like, wait a minute, like I know, these 6th graders might not be under my jurisdiction, or maybe they're from a different town, but we still ought to care about them. And that's totally true. But like the committee that is making the decision of should they come or not, or should they stay in their sending elementary school has already, on this case of Amherst, has already made that decision. And it sounds like, at least for next year, the other districts have too. So I wouldn't want to try and convince, hey, your 6th graders are getting old, they really ought to come to the middle school, right? That's not my call. So it's a hard thing to articulate because I share like almost all those concerns. It's just about like scoping the vote for me. So that's it.
Ms. Spitzer. Carrie, you're muted.
Sorry, it's been a long day. It's a tricky conversation with the two things. So I'm going to try to keep my hat on. So we've talked a bit about my region hat on. So we've talked a bit about kind of the space economies of scale, for lack of a better term. And you mentioned briefly like the bit about with nurses and like we wouldn't have to. But I'm thinking like one of the advantages I see to our 7th and 8th graders is the potential to not only like have the space to do more electives, but with more students in the building, then we might be able to have electives like languages and music and all of these other ones. So I just want to understand though from what Dr. Morris said, like would we actually need to open up the regional agreement to be able to have some of that staffing economies of scale in the same way that we're having the space economies of scale, so that if we have now more students who are, I'm not saying this needs to be decided, but we have potentially more students who want to take French or Latin or Spanish or Chinese, whatever language we're offering in the middle school, and that could benefit 7th and 8th graders because there's a broader menu that they can choose from. Is that possible, or is that not possible because, or is it to be determined?
Yeah, so it's definitely possible. We do it all the time. We have staff members split between districts in a variety of roles. We have special ed comes to mind most frequently, but all of central office, or just about all of central office. We have facilities and maintenance folks who are split between districts. This is routine for us. It's not fun, right? If we're one district, life would be easier from a logistical perspective that way, but this is not something that is new or novel to us. Maybe if we're in a different district, it would be, but we have a whole lot of people who work in 2 and 3 districts who are employed by us. So we wouldn't have to open the regional agreement for that. We look at how much time they spend and appropriate the FTEs, the representative district, and HR does this, routine, and we review it every year. So some years, some of those FTEs switch a bit or are adjusted a bit based on the workload that people have. But this is the joys of working for 3 districts, and that won't change anytime soon, and nor am I advocating for it. So it's definitely possible and something that's part of our routine business.
Oops, Ms. Dancer. Sorry, I muted myself instead of unmute.
So I just wanted to say, your remarks, Dr. Morris, about the rental agreement, I really had no idea until you spoke tonight what was meant by a rental agreement. And also your comment about that the sixth grade would still be governed or handled by sixth grade, not the middle school, really puts it in a different perspective for me and does make it easier for me to sort of understand some of what is going to happen. So thank you for that.
Miss Kenny.
Thanks. Okay. Oh, too many buttons. Sorry. So the rental agreement with the sixth graders still being governed by their sending district makes sense to me if it's just one district, right? So what happens if it's Amherst and Shutesbury, not that Shutesbury is doing this, end up sending their kids, like who manages that? Because then like the rental agreement sounds to me like it only works if it's one town. If it's more than one town, then what happens?
Dr. Morris?
Yeah, so it would be done based on, sounds like we're talking about assessment, but a 5-year rolling average of kids. You know, it's what we've done for other situations. So let's say there was 100 kids coming from Amherst and Shutesbury. I'm just using a round number. 100's not really what it would be. And let's say 10 of them are from Shutesbury. Gotcha, Steve. And 90 are from Amherst. And we'd look at what the rental cost is of space, and we would apportion it based on that. We wouldn't use 5-year rolling average, actually. You know, that was a bizarre joke to make, but I got into assessment thinking. But it would really be based on population. We would assign it based on population.
Okay, so that's the money though, but what about the curriculum, right? From what I'm understanding, it's that the sixth graders, wherever their sending district is, they're being managed and still deciding the curriculum. So if it's Amherst and Shutesbury, who currently have 2 different curriculum for their sixth grade, right?
In some areas, yes.
Then what happens? Is it
that would be a conversation we'd have to have with the Shutesbury School Committee.
That's not okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for, especially because I don't work for that school committee at all. I wouldn't want to overstep. I mean, you're not suggesting that I should.
I just was using Shutesbury as an example. I could have used Pelham.
All these are just because I actually work for them, but I think the same answer, which is that would be a conversation for the conversation that we'd have to have. And it goes to Mr. Stammel's point, which is a really good one, which is when Amherst sixth grade can essentially move, and if it chooses, essentially keep the same model of kind of like a quasi-team model that already exists, that's easy. When you're talking about one class of kids going, then I think much more conversation would have to happen about what the model is and whether that would want to fold into a larger mix with kids from other towns, or whether it would literally be running like one classroom for one teacher to do the same thing, right? And that would really be a conversation for each of the town's elementary school committees to make a judgment about.
Mr. Stammel.
Yeah, because I was confused when you had said that the sending district, let's say Leverett, would manage the curriculum for those sixth graders. And I'm glad Sarah Best brought that up, because it didn't make sense to me. I mean, I think what really would happen is you would have a discussion with Leverett and something would be worked out curriculum wise. Yeah. So it would be some kind of understanding, you know, among 2 or more towns.
And that's correct, but it wouldn't be necessarily the region. Right. So it would be Amherst School Committee and Leverett School Committee and districts working on that, not this committee. That's where it sort of like gets.
Yeah, that's where my head is not really totally at. Right. Thanks.
So that's where, yeah. So unless, as Dr. Morris said, unless we opt to, almost all 4 towns choose to send sixth grade to the middle school, and we all therefore decide to open up the regional agreement again, that's the way it would be. The elementary districts coordinating on that, not the regional school committee. Dr. Morris?
Yeah, just one, and I awkward to do, I'm sorry to, I think the one little caveat I'd make to the point you just made, which I agreed with 99% of it, is even if one town, let's say Shutesbury, decides the only town that it wants to send their 6th grade students, the 4 towns could vote to amend the regional agreement to have Shutesbury 6th graders join the regional schools. It doesn't have to be that all 4 towns have to go for the regional agreement to get changed. I think it's unlikely, but that's something that the 4 towns could have a conversation about long term. Even if not all 4 go, they could still amend their agreement to indicate that some towns send their 6th grade and some towns don't, and adopt the 6th grade as their own. So that is just a possibility. I don't think it's on the horizon anytime soon, but I just want to, on a technical level, it could be just one town and the regional agreement get redone. I wouldn't recommend it anytime soon.
Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Harrington.
Yeah, I was wondering, maybe I'm asking this a little too far in advance, but so like our students that are in like specialized programs like ILC, et cetera, building blocks, are we thinking about how we're going to, like where we're going to educate them? Like, do they fold into AIMS or how does that work? Or again, am I like way too early in asking that question?
No, that was a big part of my thinking about delaying in the Amherst School Committee the transition for a year. I think for the majority of students, we could honestly make the transition work next year, but I don't think we could do it for all of the students. And I think you're talking about some vulnerable populations there. There are corollary specialized programs to those that are found in all of the elementary schools, or the ones that have specialized programs at the elementary level. AIMS is the only one with the same acronym throughout. But if like ILC, there's an ESP program at the middle school that those students in general would transition through. And I think how that works and how the staffing would work was really what we need to spend a lot of time in the next couple of summers, as well as school years, to work out. But there are programs that extend up, and the same with building blocks to SSP. They're not the same, but they are looking at the same types of disabilities, students with the same types of challenges. And so we do need time and space to be able to work on what those transitions would look like for those students to make sure we get it right, because the stakes are really high for vulnerable populations. And like you mentioned, so we do have those programs. That flow already happens, but exactly how we do that is something we have to talk about. And I think the other thing that comes up is we often have clusters where we'll have a lot of students graduate the AIMS program 1 year at the elementary level, and then we'll have 2 years where there's very few, right? It's not like there's an even distribution by grade level. So some years we may need to think about different staffing supports for 6 through 8 than other years based on just the flow of students and the quantity of students. So it is something we are thinking about. So it's definitely not too early, but it's one of the reasons we really want to take our time and do this in the way that's in the best interest of all kids. And actually that plays out, if I could just add, to some of the other towns, member towns, who don't necessarily have the quantity or economy of scale to have their own specialized programs, but have students who do transition well into those programs as they hit the middle school. So that's going to be a conversation we need to have over time.
Mr. Harrington.
And then one other question, I'm trying to ask this from the regional perspective as much as possible. But so there's the program in Amherst Public Schools, the dual language program, Combinantes. I'm wondering, does it change how that program works? And are we like, is there a way for us to not like shortchange those kids? Because in my mind, I have it that like it now goes from kids, from folks who had the idea that they were going to send their kids from K through 6 in Combinantes. And in my mind, that ends and becomes just language class, or no?
Yep. So I think I can answer that well from the regional level. So a couple of years ago, when Ms. Richardson and I were touring around different schools with dual language programs, we did look at middle school models. So basically, where do kids graduate from? And the schools, I mean, we visited one, it was a 6 through 8, because that's, again, the majority of districts. And what that looks like at the middle school often is part of the day is in the non-English language that's being taught, in our case, Spanish. So it doesn't maintain the full half day. It generally goes down to about a third of the day. So often based on staffing or expertise, whether it's math class or science class or social studies class, there's some class that's taught fully in our case in Spanish. And the other thing that continues is we want to think about world language. That's the other decision point, is do we continue with Spanish as a unique language? Because the students, when they're graduating 5th grade at the elementary schools at these other districts, it's not appropriate for them to be taking the language that they've been having half a day of school in for the last 6 years. So transitioning into, schools do it a couple different ways, but oftentimes they integrate in, and we have this program here. We have had this program of like a native speakers class when kids hit middle school. So when we have Spanish speakers who want to take Spanish as a language, they don't necessarily, Spanish 1 or Spanish in 7th grade is not an appropriate class for them. They know the language. They often work on grammar or other pieces. And so, those are the 2 sort of decision points, but they're decision points we were planning for anyway as students hit 7th grade. In other words, the dual language program doesn't just end when you hit middle school, it evolves. When you get to high school, that's a unique other set of challenges, but that we've got a little time, our highest grade level, 2nd grade. So it would just accelerate our thinking about what that program would look like. Our highest grade level is 2nd grade, so it still gives us 3 years to plan out and map out what we want the middle school experience to be for that group of students. So I feel like we have sufficient time in planning, and there's some great models out there about 6th grade middle schools and what how a dual language elementary school experience dovetails when you get to middle school. Sorry, being really long-winded tonight. I'll try to be more succinct.
Are there other comments or questions? I think it might be helpful for us to, as a committee, to sit with the report a little bit longer, and maybe sort of take the opportunity to just sort of dig through, because a lot of that working group or advisory board, I'm not sure what the official name of it is, and there's links in Dr. Morris's presentation to that full report. It's long, but there's a lot of really rich information in there that considered a lot of these questions that we're sort of wrestling with about curriculum and impact on 6th graders, social emotional, the pros and cons of being in elementary school versus in the middle school. What are the pros and cons of a middle school experience having 3 years versus just 2 years? So and the group put in a lot of time and work on that, and it included teachers from 6th grade and from different towns too, not just Amherst, as well as the middle school. So I think it might be helpful for us to sort of sit with that a little bit longer. And then, and keeping in mind that we're looking at this with our region hats on, not necessarily our elementary hats on that. So unless somebody wants to make a motion, I'm going to suggest that we move on. Okay. Next up is the item that we added this afternoon based on action from the governor earlier today. So there's a link to an article describing that action in the agenda, and I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Morris, to talk about this.
Sure. So I got an email this morning from Desi asking a select group of districts to attend a webinar or a meeting this afternoon, which I attended. And in short, the local representative in Amherst-Pelham and part of Granby, who's Mindy Dom, has been advocating, because many districts like hers, Amherst-Pelham and Granby, have not had pooled testing up and running this year, to activate the National Guard to be supporting pooled testing getting off the ground in her member districts as well as others. This afternoon, in the webinar I had with Desi, they indicated that they had, they didn't say explicitly, they didn't speak of Representative Doan, but they agreed that we want to get this pooled testing program up and running. And the problem, particularly as it relates to Western Mass and Central Mass to a lesser extent, is staffing. So out of the districts on the call, I know a number of people, and there's a lot of districts out our way. CIC Health, who's the state-appointed vendor, has struggled to increase their staffing out this way enough to get the program off the ground. So this was all new news. As Ms. McDonald said, we didn't have 48 hours. We didn't even have, I don't know, what do we have? 6 hours, 7 hours since that meeting till right now. And I have to make a decision tomorrow about whether to allow for National Guard folks to come in. I asked a number of clarifying questions on the webinar. One was that these are all fully vaccinated individuals. They've all been Cori checked. What they will be doing is just supporting the collection of the swabs. That's part of the pool testing process, and that it's not a long-term solution. In other words, this is to get the program off the ground over time. CIC Health does expect to be able to hire enough staff members where we won't have to rely on the National Guard to be supporting us in this effort. You know, I had a conversation and email communication today with Nurse Leader Supernaut. She said she spoke to our new lead from CIC Health on this. We've changed over 3 times, I think, now, and so we feel good about the new person who's leading our efforts. She did think that they'll be able to staff our program relatively soon, so that if we do move forward using the National Guard for this, it will be a temporary measure. And, you know, it's hard because we've been promised things before. They haven't always come to fruition, but, you know, I know, you know, Nurse Supernaut felt like there was more confidence in this conversation. And so I think there's a lot of interest in pool testing. It's an optional program as opposed to things that are mandated by us for kids. And so for that reason, you know, my current feeling is to get the program off the ground that's about health and safety, that's optional, that it seems advisable from my perspective and our perspective, having talked about it this afternoon with, you know, nursing staff, that we would utilize all the resources we can. And what we need to do is make sure we're communicating, if people are participating in pool testing, that it may be with, you know, folks from the National Guard who are collecting their samples. They're not teaching our kids. They're not in direct care in any way, but they, you know, they would be seen, and they are wearing their, as they are National Guards folks, they have to wear their outfit. So they won't be plain clothes. It'll be very visible to National Guards on our campus. It's something I'm struggling a bit with because I know some folks in our community may have feelings about that, but because it's an optional program and it's something about health and safety and we're in a pandemic, it leads me to believe that we should use all the resources we can to get things off the ground and try to fade our use of National Guard as soon as possible. And that's no disrespect to National Guard. It's actually just being cognizant of some folks in our community who in the past have expressed concerns about, you know, kind of military being on campus, things like that. It's not my personal viewpoint, but it's trying to be responsive to our community. So it is something that I'm wrestling with at this point. It is something that I feel like we should do. These folks are volunteering from the National Guard to support our communities. And I think if it gets us tested, and I think there's a lot of value to that. But, you know, as this is, I know in Amherst and the region, a conversation that we want to have in public with an impossibly short time frame. We did post it this afternoon. We didn't just say, you know, do it orally here, because we want to be transparent that meeting I had today was at 1 o'clock or 1:30. We posted it within an hour after that or thereabouts, because we wanted to at least have the conversation here. And, you know, I'd love the guidance and advice of the committee so that, you know, I can think about how to move forward tomorrow. So that's sort of where we are. I'll do a quicker summary to see if I can be more succinct. Pool testing's not up and running. We're on a third different, you know, subcontracted vendor. They're working on gaining staffing, and the idea from the state is to call on the National Guard to get districts. It's only for districts that have not been off the ground, particularly those in Western and Central Massachusetts who have had staffing issues, to be able to get it off the ground. And then over time, CIC Health believes they will be able to hire enough staff where they can fade that support and use civilian staff support to have it. So it's really about how quickly we want the program to getting off the ground, and the perhaps concerns about having National Guard on our campus. So that's where I am, and I'd love the guidance and advice of this body.
Ms. Lord.
Thank you. I do have a question, and please forgive me if you said it. I did hear about the Cori, but I don't know if I missed whether you mentioned they would be vaccinated, thinking about our mandatory vaccination requirement.
Yep, thank you. And I did ask that question explicitly because of the staff vaccine requirement that was passed by this body, and all the National Guards folks, Guards people who would be on campus, they're required to be vaccinated based on their role in the National Guard, is my understanding. But or at least Massachusetts end of it, but they are all vaccinated.
Ms. Spitzer.
Thanks. Just a clarifying question. You mentioned they'd be in uniform. Would they be armed, for lack of a better term? Just curious.
I don't believe so, but I don't know that. I'm writing that down as a note for sure, but it's something I can absolutely check on. I'm not sure why they would be. I know that's a naive comment to make, but I think in this scenario, I don't know why they would be, because they're not operating in a, they're not, and there's no critique, and I know everything gets very tense around this, but they're not, police officers who have other responsibilities. My understanding of the National Guard gets called in for this, and this is what they're doing as in their role as National Guard. They don't have like called away for another emergency. They would, that this is their emergency they're being called in for, if that makes sense. But I can confirm that for the committee, certainly before a decision is made tomorrow.
Mr. Demling.
Yeah, so Carrie asked my first question. I guess my comment is, I don't know if I'm comfortable with green lighting this immediately. I mean, the decision was just made by Governor Baker. And this isn't because I don't support pool testing. I don't want people who want to volunteer to participate I've been very upset with the governor in the state about this. I think that's, as I'm sure, many of us have been frustrated with the rollout of this. So it's not about that. It's about, uniformed officers having a daily visual presence in our schools. And I just think that we would want, I think, at least a couple of weeks for the public to know this is coming, so that they can give us some feedback on it. Because I don't know if I can say exactly how people would feel about it. Like, for example, we've talked about school resource officers, and we don't have one. I don't think we've ever had one, if I'm correct. I think a year and a half ago, Mr. Harrington brought forward a resolution where we said we're definitely never going to have one, which everybody supported. So that's very clear that we don't need that. This is, I understand, a little nuanced because it's kind of like the necessary thing in order to get the program up and running. But I'm struggling with just immediately saying yes every day. Let's have both parents and kids and members of our community who all have obviously different feelings and experiences with law enforcement to want to have that happen. So I don't know how. It's not very helpful because I can't say exactly a yes or no. I just think that we need at least a couple weeks of community opportunity to talk about this.
Mr. Harrington.
Yeah, so it's possible, kind of probable, that I have like a slightly different perspective on this. So my thing is, so I can admit it flat out. I'm like a moderately disillusioned veteran, right? Like, I'm not super pro military in general, right? Because I don't think that our military gets used for the right thing most of the time. I'll say the vast majority of the time. And I also have a bias. Like, most folks probably don't understand the rift between active duty and National Guard and how folks look at each other or whatever. But like, this is what they're there for. This is like the actual purpose that they serve, in my view. The only real questions I have is like, are we talking about we're bringing in medics, or are we bringing in like a company of infantrymen? That completely changes my. I'm yes one way. If we're bringing in medics, well, we're bringing in people that do this consistently. If we're bringing in infantrymen, or I was a proud combat engineer. I don't think anybody that I served with should be testing kids for COVID. So that, I think that's the concern I would have. So, but yeah, I'm not necessarily concerned about the idea of them coming in armed. That's not the point of the mission. And generally, you would come equipped with the tools for the mission. So that's not really my concern. And I'm not so concerned necessarily about them recruiting. The other question I have is, I know there are certain circumstances, like I did a little bit of time after I was on active duty in the National Guard, and we did, I wouldn't call us, having been deployed, but we did things like we events, these sorts of things, and we weren't required to wear our uniforms. Is it possible to request? Like their commander could absolutely grant that request. Is it possible for us to request that through DESI, that they come in civilian attire? Because I do understand that people have issues with military folks recruiting on our campuses, and it could be seen that if they're coming in, you know, dress A's, looking real super cool, like that's a sell. It's what they call passive recruiting. So that's kind of my take on it.
Dr. Morris?
So on the first point you made, Mr. Harrington, I don't know which, you know, we sort of talked a bit on the webinar about which type of National Guard. You definitely have more experience than me in this world. So I don't have all the lingo that you do have. So I appreciate you sharing that with me. And I don't know the answer. In terms of the uniforms, I will double check and confirm, but my understanding is they do need to wear, while they're working in the capacity as National Guard, that they are wearing their National Guard attire. So, you know, that's what I've been told, but I'll confirm that and certainly can let the community know tomorrow one way or the other. At least I can ask the question and get you the you know, confirmed information. And my understanding is whatever their role was before, that they're being trained to, you know, to collect the samples and that's the next mission that they have in terms of their guard responsibilities.
I think before I go to the next hand, maybe you described this, Dr. Morris, but can you explain sort of the logistics of this? Like, they're not going to be walking around the school hallways, and so, you know, like, help us understand sort of what sort of visibility they might have. My understanding is that students, at least, well, anybody would be opting into this program, not so nobody's forced to participate in pooled testing. So just understanding sort of what it might look like in reality on the ground, were we to have these folks there.
Yeah, so you know, I think it does happen in a disclosed, you know, room where, you know, there's observation of samples, but the students generally do it themselves. They hand it off and it's collected. It has to be done, you know, there needs to be a witness, and this is some of these folks' role and responsibility. But I do want to be honest that, you know, I think it's a really important point you made, roaming the hallways. They wouldn't be roaming the hallways, but, you know, they're going to use the restroom. They're going to need to get a drink of water. I can't pretend that they won't be have some visibility in the schools as someone who's volunteering their time. So, you know, I think you're right that the point that I'm hearing, and I agree with, that it's an optional program, but if they are going to be on our campus, you know, if we move forward, and while they won't be randomly popping in classrooms, they're human beings that have needs. They're going to need to eat. They're going to need to go to the bathroom. They need to get a drink. And if folks are feeling like, you know, the vision, seeing someone in uniform is going to be a problem in the hallway, then I get that, and that's why we're having the conversation tonight.
Ms. Dancer.
So, and I'm curious what since this is an opt-in program, do we have any idea what the demand is for this? Because I know last year we decided not to do the pool testing because we didn't think it was really going to be particularly effective for the numbers of people. So do you have any idea about that?
So we did send out consents last week for participation. I think we are, you know, I think I've heard, because of the Delta variant, more interest right now than perhaps we heard last year when we had it during the, we had that available to them. And I think there's more testing options available right now, you know, with UMass being so convenient and individual tests. I know a lot of people are doing the take-home PCR that wasn't quite as available last year. So I don't know. What I do know is for some staff and some families of children, especially young children, they're seeing this as an important mitigation strategy. And so I think it's important for folks who it's important for, and for folks who aren't going to do it or going to find other ways, it's not. So I think school-wide, I don't anticipate 80 or 90% participation. I just don't see it. But for the, let's say, I'm making up a number, so I'm not predicting, but just say for, like, let's say 50% of people wanted to participate. That's a lot of people. And that's a lot of people for this is a valuable thing. Again, we certainly can. I'm hearing the feedback tonight of some, ambivalence maybe is the word that's coming to mind. And it's something that we can, the state is committed, and they said this in the call, like if your community decides not to move forward with it, we'll absolutely work with you and the vendor to add staff. It's not like this or nothing. We're not going to help you. It may be a delay in getting going because they're doing this because there's not enough people. They haven't found enough people to employ outside the National Guard to do this, particularly in the western and central parts of the state. So it's not like this or nothing. It might be this, but we need to wait a month longer, right? That's sort of the discussion from what I gathered from the phone call today.
Mr. Stammel?
I think the benefits far outweigh any concerns. I think, and I would fully support it.
I too, I see your hand, Ms. Spitzer, but coming back to you. I struggle with it. I understand the sensitivity on sort of having uniformed personnel. I also know that many people, even within our community, choose service as a pathway after high school, after college. Many families, we probably have National Guards people and other veterans. We have Mr. Harrington here, and I'm not a proponent of it necessarily myself personally, but I don't think that I don't think when we've placed such a high value and we've been really, really adamant about getting the pooled testing and having this available for our students. And we've been very, very frustrated at the delays and being able to implement it. We hear from our community how frustrated they are. And now we're hesitating simply because of who is going to be doing it at this moment. And these are folks that are serving our state in sort of are called to do this kind of work. So I, as I, don't love it, I also would fully support it if it enables us to sort of get the testing up and running sooner. I'm happy to hear that it's not the permanent solution, that it's a temporary, so that as a bridge until we are able to get other staff. And I think just to help folks understand the timing, so you said it's not a this or nothing. In terms of making a decision to accept to go with this program, we don't have 2 weeks. I know Mr. Demling asked if we could wait to come back at this in 2 weeks, but my understanding is you have to make a decision tomorrow. So if we don't go with that, then we're committing to waiting until there are other staff available. Is that correct? Okay. And if we go with this program being offered with the National Guard, it's probably still 10 days. Is that correct?
I think that's fair. I think we'd be, shooting perhaps for the week after next.
Thank you. Ms. Spitzer?
Thanks. Yeah, and I didn't mean my question to come off as saying I was not interested. I think it's just, so I similarly have family members who have served. I believe that, I've got a neighbor right now who's in the National Guard, and he's great, and I would be more than happy to have him be in my kid's classroom. I am very sensitive to the fact that we live in a community where my experience is not the only one, and so there are going to be people who have varied experiences. So I think I would be in favor of this, but I also would want us to communicate in a way around this that we might. 24 hours thing is so frustrating, but I'm thinking, can we create a FAQ? Frequently asked questions like, who are these new people in our classroom? What are they here for? What are the, why are we, because kids are going to come home and they're going to have stories, and I can just see it potentially being misunderstood about what our motives were and what the folks are doing there. So I think if we do choose to go this route, and I'd be okay with it, I think we'd need to communicate. The other thing I'm thinking is, I've already completed the consent for my kid. So what if this is the thing that makes me say no? I think we need to communicate in that document. How do I go about revising my decision around pool testing. And people should be free to make that choice. So I'm supportive. I'm frustrated that we're at this position, but I think because of the situation we're in due to the pandemic, I do think it's important that we keep this option on the table. And I also was just a quick follow-up is I know that the National Guard has been out doing this type of work in schools, like bus driving, even I think out in the eastern part of the state and things like that. So I don't know if it's worth including in that document or that communication other instances where this has been happening in other communities, or if you have heard from other superintendents how that's gone. Those are my lingering questions, so thanks.
I second your ask for communication and FAQs, and that I think that would be really helpful, as well as sort of enabling folks to alter their consent. I hesitate that there's like 3 levels of consent, I think, at this point, because they might consent to the testing, but only if it's not National Guard, because I'd hate to ask the district to go back and re-ask for consent again once we switch from National Guard to something else. Should we choose that? Other questions or comments from Mr. Dimling?
Yeah, so I appreciate all the different points of view here. I especially appreciate Mr. Harrington bringing up the difference in the mission between the National Guard and the military, part of which is to help with national emergencies, which is obviously this is one, and to help local authorities as needed, which this is. So I mean, I'm not questioning the this is an appropriate mission for the National Guard, I guess. And I'm glad you brought up the timing issue, Ms. McDonald, because that certainly changes things in my mind. Yeah, I mean, I think I would still really struggle with this if they were armed. I think that would change my feeling on it. And if we can't, so I think I could probably like support a conditional, I don't know if we're doing motion, conditional yes on this, but conditioned on that they're not armed. I just don't, I understand the urgency to like get going with pool testing, but that seems to me a bridge too far without getting significant feedback from the community. So yeah, so I would be okay doing it conditional yes on that, and then I like the communication suggestion. And like we should be just as clear and factual communicating, hey, heads up, this is what's going to happen, because even if you're not participating in the pool testing, you're gonna, students and staff and families could see them and see them in the schools, and so we want to communicate that to everybody, and then we'll I'm sure if people feel strongly about it, we'll get feedback on this in the next couple of weeks, and if we have to change course, we have to change course, even if it's not easy. But yeah, that's how I'm feeling right now.
Ms. Lord.
Thank you. Building upon what Ms. Spitzer said, I think it would be important to also have some mental health support. Like for some of our students, it's going to be triggering and traumatizing, whether we've seen uniformed people murdering Black and brown bodies, over and over on social media and TV, or we're from a country that had a military presence and we might have some trauma around that. I would just like to make sure we have, in addition to like talking to the community and having frequently asked questions, some support for those who it will be trigger or very discomfortable. Thank you.
So this isn't Dr. Morse, sorry.
So I appreciate your point, Ms. Lord. I guess just wanting to share where I am, just hearing the feedback, which is really helpful, is that I am struggling. So I think Ms. Lord raises really good points, right? And at this moment in time, if seeing, and I'm not, this is just picking up where you left off, Ms. Lord. If I'm mischaracterizing your comments, you will please let me know. But if the presence of uniformed folks in school can be triggering, that's in a time where we're already heightened sensitivity. That's a concern, right? And I want to respect that comment. And I think everything you requested is super on point, and yet if that's going to be triggering, then the cost benefit of this conversation gets tricky, right? And I'm not saying this to disagree with your point, Ms. Lord. I'm actually trying to amplify that to make sure your concerns are heard and the concerns of others. I mean, another scenario could be, and it's not a great one, but another scenario could be, we could say affirmatively, yes, we'll look into National Guard, and if we can reevaluate this, because again, I don't think we're getting this up and running next week. I just don't think, separate from the National Guard, just the logistics. We just started our third vendor. We just started with them last week. If the National Guard was here right now, I don't think we could get it up and running next week. And I do wonder if we see where we are in a week, because I think Mr. Demling's point is a good one, and about the time frame being really tight. So I do have to commit, but on the call they were clear, like, hey, if you end up not needing them, that's fine. They have plenty of other things to do. So I think what I have to do by tomorrow is to signify an intent. But we could work with our vendor and try to get a more accurate sense of the balance that I think you're all looking for. Like, is it really just 1 week more because the new vendor is able to get their staff in time? If it's 1 week more, that probably would shift my thinking. If it's a month more, that would shift my thinking a different way. So I'm not trying to just find a compromise or get out of the conversation. It's because I'm trying to consider all the feedback I've heard, as well as, Mr. Demling's not the only one, but I know you expressed multiple times the concern that I share as well about the time frame of making a decision. So I don't know how the committee feel with me writing in the conditional. Yes, I agree with the firearm piece that people raised, but also exploring with the vendor and trying to come back to the committee, even if it means scheduling a meeting next week, even just on this topic of like, this is what it looks like. It looks like it's a 1 week gap, or it looks like, ooh, it's a 6 week gap. So that you could maybe better weigh the options. Because I think where we're all in the dark right now, myself included, is what's the real weight that it would be, right? We presume things, but we have a new vendor who talked to our nurse leader this afternoon with more optimism. But I know if I say no, the option's off the table. So I don't know how people feel about saying yes, but with that conditional about the firearms, but also waiting and seeing if we end up needing them, or if we feel like it's a minor instead of a major delay. And no one has the answer to that right now. If nurse leader Supernat was on the call, she would say more or less what I'm saying, because it's my words are just coming directly from her. But I just want to really acknowledge Ms. Lord's point, and seeing if I can provide more information to the committee before guards folks are literally in the schools, because it's not going to happen on Monday of next week. I also want to say none of this is disrespect to the Guard or to Representative Dom, who's been a huge advocate in trying to get pool testing going. She's advocating everything. She's done great things for our district in terms of earmarks to support us in a whole variety of ways. I want to be careful that it's a hard conversation, because I sort of appreciate what everyone's bringing to it. And maybe if we can get more information before a true decision point, that might benefit both the committee and the community. Sorry, the conversations made me consider and reconsider. That's why it's good we meet and we do these things in public meetings, right? So everyone gets to see my thought process as it evolves from the last 20 minutes. So I don't know how comfortable people are with, at least committing to the option without committing to having people actually in.
Mr. Stamo?
Just one other quick question. Do we have a sense of how many National Guards people would be in the building?
So most places are staffed. Most districts our size are staffed in general between 3 and 5 people coming in to a school at a time. So I would expect it to be in that, maybe 3 to 6 in that range. I think CIC Health does have a few people that they have committed for us. So, I think it's certainly less than 10 and probably less than 5.
So I'm thinking, I mean, they're self-contained mostly in a space, in a room. They'll use some facilities, but it's not as if they're walking around the whole facility and that there's a lot of them. And it just, I think it's something to keep in mind that it seems like they'll have a very low profile.
Mr. Harrington, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, so the caveat for me really does come down to, I mean, I guess we're technically talking about the same thing if we're talking about weapons, right? Is the uniform piece to me. Like, I feel a lot more comfortable if they come in civvies and they look like everybody else and they just happen to have this other part-time job. I mean, we have educators. I can think of like specific teachers that are gone for a weekend a month that you would probably never know on the in-between. I think to me, that's the bigger piece. Cause like Miss Lord said something and like a couple kids like faces just popped into my head and like, I don't know which way they would go. And I know they trust me. They know that I was in the military, but I'm not like walking into their school in my uniform. And so yeah, that kind of put a whole different weight on it for me. So for me, the caveat would be no uniforms.
Ms. Pitzer.
Yeah, I think hearing Ms. Lord's comment, I had the similar reaction. If we're going to cause one kid to have that type of reaction, like the school should be a safe place. And so if the uniform or is what is triggering, then if we can find a way to work with the state or the National Guard so that they're not wearing uniforms, I'd be in favor of it. But I don't know. Thank you for raising that issue.
Other thoughts? No? Dr. Morris?
See if I can ask a concise question. Is the committee comfortable with me at least answering the survey I need to fill out by tomorrow affirmatively, but coming back to them before we would actually have someone in the National Guard coming into our buildings? In other words, it's just preserving the option but we wouldn't actually have people come in until we have another meeting and you can get more information that I can share with you, both on the uniform. The arm piece is, I think, really clear if everybody was on board with that. But the uniform, the real delay, like, you be able to provide you more information, but I don't want to lose the option, because if I come back and I'm like, I don't think it's going to happen for 4 months. If we don't do this, for me, that changes the calculus. And so that's why I want to make sure that the committee is comfortable with me doing that, but not moving forward with anyone coming in the building until we had another public discussion. How does that sound to folks?
I saw a lot of thumbs up. Yep.
Okay, then I will do that, but I really appreciate, I know it was a lengthy conversation and you didn't have as much information because it all just happened, but this was incredibly helpful to me. So I just want to share appreciation for everybody.
Thank you. Next up is budget process and engagement. And we put this on mostly so that we keep talking about the things that we started talking about back at our retreat in August, and talk about sort of the work, some of the ideas that that the budget subcommittee has started working on. And I'm going to look to Ms. Stancer to give a brief update.
Okay. So we are having a meeting next week. I did meet with Dr. Slaughter to talk about some of the things that we've been talking about. And there are really kind of 3 things, I think. There's the FAQ about the budget process, an assessment meeting that would happen before the town meeting. It would be probably in November, sometime before the holiday in November. I mean, this is not decided. This is just kind of rough estimate of what might happen. that would be with town officials. This would not be a school committee meeting necessarily. You could come, but it would be for the towns to talk about their situations and what they're looking at financially, which Dr. Slaughter feels would be very helpful to him as he begins the work on the budget. And then some kind of a public forum to go out to the community and talk about the budget. And tonight, what I would like to ask, because I think we will probably focus on the FAQ next week, and what the questions might be, is that if any of you have things that you think should go into an FAQ about the budget, would you send them to me, whether they're questions or pieces of information that either you would like to know as a person. I mean, it's taken me quite a while to sort of get semi up to speed on the budget and the budget process, several years. So I can imagine that even some of you may have questions. It would be very helpful to hear from you. So you could just email those to me, and it would be good to have them by Monday next week. And I guess that's really what I have. Allison, Ms. McDonald, did you want to add anything else?
Only that I think that the Four Towns meeting in November, that idea, I think it would be helpful to have that truly as a Four Towns meeting. I don't know Dr. Slaughter's thoughts on that, but I think we as a committee would benefit from participating in that and hearing directly from them, so that so we can ask questions and have the conversation and share our FAQ, if anything, right?
Okay. So you're suggesting that maybe we would want that to include the school committee members? Yeah.
I don't know how if other folks have thoughts on that as well, but yeah, it would be to call it as in much in the same way that we've called Four Towns meetings in the past, so that it is we call to order the meeting as well as any other bodies that have a quorum. If we didn't have a quorum, then we wouldn't have to obviously call to order. But Mr. Demling?
So Ms. Dancer referred to it as an assessment meeting. So is the distinction, we had talked before about trying to split these two topics. One, what's the financial picture for the coming fiscal year, and let's have the towns weigh in on where they're sitting, versus what ought the assessment method to be, and what are our individual feelings on that, like, and sort of like trying to resolve those differences. So are we talking about the second or not?
Ms. Dancer?
I think I do not think that a meeting in November would be to talk about money. And it would not be really to talk about how the assessment would be done. It would be to hear from the towns themselves what kinds of things they're coming up against. You know, the tax cap, expenses that they're anticipating. And I think perhaps before we get to the point where we have to talk about money and we have to talk about the method, would be an opportunity for people to get together outside of the tensions that arise around those things. And I guess that's how I was sort of picturing this might go forward.
Mr. Demling?
So I think that is a noble goal. But I think if we get our four towns together to talk about their financial situation, we are definitely going to hear four towns talk about how they are experiencing financial pressure. And I'm not sure that any meeting of our four harmonious towns talking about money or their own, even in general terms, is going to lead to there's going to be tension, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because there's unresolved conflict there. So I mean, I'm not saying that's a reason not to do it. I just think scoping it appropriately, particularly with a meeting that large and asking people to attend it, they're going to want to know, all right, why am I being asked to attend this Saturday morning meeting or whatever? And then just really clearly setting expectations about that, I think would be helpful. I don't know how to parse it out, because I know I serve on a elementary district where this is simpler because we have one town. And so the budget process kind of kicks off with this guidance meeting where we get a sense of the town's financial picture. They don't say this is your X percent, for sure, support level, but they do give us like a background on it. So this sounds like a corollary to that, which would be helpful. I just don't know how to take that and then say, okay, in a few weeks, then we're going to talk about, first pass at assessment method. So
I do think that there's I think, as I understand sort of what your comments, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Stancer, but your comments about not money is like, we're not going to be talking about the FY 2023 budget in that's the money that we're not talking about at that meeting. But you're right. I would agree with you, Mr. Demling, that money will be the conversation, just not what is it for that year, because the point of this is to kick off the process as opposed to start building that. I think it would be, I mean, I don't want to speak for Dr. Slaughter, but are you thinking that then there would be a second meeting where assessment would be talked about, or would we be talking about sort of within the context of having the conversation with the 4 towns about sort of their indicators or pressures, also sort of what are their expectations of what they can, where they'd like to see the assessment method, just as an input before we get to the dollars. It seems like that might be two things that we could accomplish in that one meeting. Ms. Dancer?
My understanding, and Dr. Slaughter is not here, so he can't correct me if I have it wrong, but I don't think he was thinking of a meeting with the entire school committees. I think he was thinking of an opportunity to talk to the financial people and, in our town, maybe a select board person, to do what you just said, is to talk about what people are coming up against before he starts. He indicated to me he thought that would be helpful for him as he begins the budget process. And not sure, there's always going to be tension in these. Has there ever not been tension in this? One thing I would add, Mr. Demling, you had mentioned the previous working groups on the assessment method. And I did talk to Mr. Mangano. We had a good conversation about it. And one thing I would say that he said he did feel that those meetings provided some collaboration, that people actually, after they'd gotten together and sort of gone through some of this stuff, that there was some idea of collaboration. The financial picture has changed today from then too. So it may be a more fraught conversation than it would have been then. And Dr. Slaughter could correct me if I misinterpreted, but he can't tonight because he's not here.
Mr. Stammel.
I know I asked our school committee and financial people on behalf of Dr. Slaughter to write out concerns, and I emailed those to him. I mean, what they see is our town's financial picture and concerns they have. I haven't heard from him. I hope he received them, but some people might be happy to meet in November, but I just know I've already asked of them, and they responded with this very, pretty lengthy, nice reply to Dr. Slaughter. So I'm not sure. Maybe it would be helpful to meet with others from their point of view. I can't speak for them, but I know they've already put in some time and effort toward it.
Any other thoughts right now? So I think the budget subcommittee is meeting on
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Mhm.
And so Ms. Stancer's asked for any input that any of us might have on creating the budget FAQ of what we'd like to see in there, to email her between now and Monday so that they can have that for their meeting. Ms. Stancer?
I would just add too, I think at this point, it would be thinking about not great detail on like, what is chapter 70? We're not looking for detail. And that's why I think some of the newer committee members might actually be really good at providing questions or things that they would want to know, because you're not so familiar with the budget. So, you know, thinking more broadly, like, where does the money come from? How do we spend the money? What do we spend the money on? Would be helpful, because ultimately this is going to go out to the public. And those people, you know, most people in the public don't really know those things either. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll move on to the next item, which is superintendent goals for this school year. And we have a first draft in here. Mr. Demling?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Would I be totally out of line asking for a 5-minute break? The 6th grade and the pool testing has me, or a 2-minute break or something. I don't know. I mean, if people don't want it, that's fine.
I'm thinking we might be able to take a break before the executive session. Will that work?
I'm sorry, I forgot about the. Yeah, that's a better point. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Dr. Morris.
Sure. So these are the draft goals. Much like in one other committee, I'm going to bring these goals to this body, and then if there's feedback, I'll adjust them. I'll add the standards from the standards superintendent practice from the DESE document. But before I did that, I figured I'd wait till there was feedback before adding those kind of features, so that it didn't add them and then have to edit the standards they're in. I tried to align them to the work that you all did in terms of the draft guidance. And so they look pretty similar to another district that some of you work for as goals, because that was one of the things, is trying to align them. But, you know, there's a particular, you know, goal number 5, which I'll speak to explicitly, is really looking that this year we have a 1-year schedule change at the high school to a block schedule, and that needs to be considered. It's already getting refined, but needs to be considered and either made permanent or to revert to their prior schedule. And there's a process that's contractual that the high school administration is working through. We also changed the start time, and we want to do, much like other districts, I was talking to one today, survey folks and get a sense of how that's going. We'll probably wait till winter or early spring to do it, because I think until it's dark out, like it will be in 2 months, it's hard to really get a sense of the impact, because it feels really different when, you know, even today the sun's going down earlier, but it's pretty nice out. And weather's not really an issue, and sun coverage isn't that much of an issue, and it feels really different in the winter. So we do want to wait and give people sufficient time, but I think those are really critical teaching and learning structures that want to get feedback on. I think the 6th grade question, even though there is a goal like this at the elementary level for one of my districts, it is looking at it from the region perspective. Because it's not just about 6th grade, it's also about the stakeholders here in the regional schools in 7th and 8th grade. And the others are, you know, some of the DEI work that is, you know, was referenced in your document, response to pandemic, both safety, but also well-being more generally, and the budget piece that you all just talked about. So those are the goals that I really appreciate the guidance document you gave, and happy to take any feedback tonight. And then the idea would be to edit these and bring them back to our next meeting for a potential vote.
Thank you. I said this in another committee meeting, but I'll say it again. I really appreciate the structure that you've incorporated in this. It's really easy to follow and easy to sort of connect and see sort of oh, okay, this is literally what you'll be and will be working on this year, and literally what we'll be evaluating progress on at the end of the year. It's I think for the public, it probably is very much easier to follow as well. So I really appreciate it. Any thoughts, comments, Mr. Harrington?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this would like fit in somewhere in goal 2, but I realized that we, with our restorative justice program at the high school, it kind of, I want to say, stalled out for a bit, and I'd be curious to see how we could not only support that, but like how we could like, I guess kind of sort of like how you were evaluating the efficacy of the schedule change, sort of kind of evaluating the efficacy of this program picking back up. I'm not sure where that would fit or how it would be worded, but something I would be interested in.
Mr. Demling.
I won't say everything I said at the other committee meeting about liking the structure of these goals and whatnot, but I like the structure of these goals and whatnot. Yeah, and so the other comment I had that I'll just repeat is that, you know, I like trying to incorporate some of this stuff into reporting back in a longer term trajectory. So, for example, some of the work, the progress we've made diversifying our staff, and the tracking the use of the ESSER funds, where those have gone, where they could be going, what the 3 to 4 year plan is for those, just so we get start to move towards less snapshotty stuff and more, you know, how we're doing over time. You know, I don't know if it doesn't necessarily have to be called out in your goals, but it's certainly something that, in terms of reporting on them, and would be helpful for me. You know, the other thing I was looking through this is thinking back to that theme of inclusion, special education inclusion that we discussed at CPAC the other week, and I don't know if it fits really well in this kind of the way that you've structured it here, but I can think of several places where it would or could be appropriate. Not that you need a goal, Dr. Morris, to be thinking about inclusion, because I know that's a high priority for you, but I just didn't know if there was a natural way to fold that in here.
Other comments? No? Very good.
And thank you, and I'll see what I can do to integrate those other ideas that you had. So that was great feedback, and I'll add, you know, the standards elements and all that jazz with the links, and bring it back in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Next, we have a view of the 2022-2023 school year calendar. And for folks that are new, we approve the annual calendar. Typically, we do this after we've gotten input or comments on from the APEA Teachers Union, and before we vote. So this is a first look at these. Dr. Morris?
Yep, and I'll just briefly go through them. So by contract, we have to present one calendar that has a September 1 start date for staff. We haven't had a September 1 start date for staff in many, many years. I think there's been a general acknowledgement that years that start on September 1st would drag pretty late into June. And there's been a desire not to have them drag that late. So we do contractually have to offer that. And the second version, there are a few changes that I want to note in this draft. We are still awaiting feedback from the APA. It was supposed to meet with them Friday. I wasn't able to meet, so I know they're accumulating feedback from their membership. So it hasn't been integrated in yet because I'm still waiting to receive it. But it did start a little bit earlier than it did last year. And the big shift on that is we ended really late last year. June 25th felt really late to many, many people. So it's starting a little bit earlier, but the other piece of feedback that I heard from the APA and from people in general was it was difficult starting with a 5-day week, that people liked a little more gradual entry. So this model, copied off a couple other districts that do it, starts with a 2-day week for students. Then it has a 4-day week for students, a 4-day weekend for Labor Day. So that Friday, in addition to the Monday, which is actual Labor Day, so, and then another 4-day week, and then a 5-day week. So it starts with 2 days, 4 days, 4 days, and then 5 days. So it's a more gradual entry back into school. For teachers, they would still be starting in the same week. They would be starting a few days earlier than they started this year. This year, they came back on a Thursday and Friday for PD and convocation, and then started on Monday. So they would be starting, in essence, 2 days earlier. But you get the benefit of a 4-day weekend, which people like to have that last taste of summer. So you've heard me say this before. You've been on the committee a while. I'm pretty agnostic as it relates to calendars and schedules. So I'm just awaiting feedback from the APA. But if the committee here had any feedback, please let me know. Generally, our process is we present it here. I'll take feedback from the administrative team as well as the APEA, as well as the school committee, and come up with final drafts for your consideration that we can come back to in 2 weeks. But the feedback I heard was really primarily around starting with a full week of school, and could we have a more gradual entry for students and staff? And I'm on board with that. I think that made a whole lot of sense. So I don't know if there's feedback from the committee that they'd like to offer now. Certainly they could look at it later and let me know, because again, we won't come back for 2 weeks on this.
Mr. Stammel.
Yeah, quick question. What is Three Kings Day?
Sure. Three Kings Day is a holiday celebrated by many people in Latin America as well as elsewhere, but primarily in Latin America. It's a biblical story, the Three Kings. And so a couple of years ago, there was enough staff members and students who were not coming to school because they were celebrating that holiday, given the demographics of our district, that we wanted to celebrate it as a holiday because it was affecting significant swaths of our population. So, and you know, it seems like there was broadly supported by the general community to have that day off as well.
Ms. Dancer.
So this looks like the first day teachers have to be back is a Friday, and then you have 2 days, and then you have one more day, and then you have a day with nothing for them. Would it make more sense to have them back on Monday and Tuesday and not Friday and Monday?
That is for new teachers, only that Friday and Monday. So it's a little hard to see.
Okay.
The 19th and 22nd is for new teacher orientation.
Oh, okay.
So generally they have 2 days before the school year. Actually, not generally. They do have 2 days before the school year where they do a bunch of orientation stuff. First day is at the district level. The second day is at the school level. So for, you know, everyone who's not a new teacher, they'd be coming back on the 23rd, which is a Tuesday. So they'd be coming back Tuesday, Wednesday, and have school Thursday, Friday. So I'm sorry that wasn't more clear. I apologize.
Well, I didn't read as carefully as I should have, but thank you.
Okay. Mr. Demling?
So yeah, I like the earlier version of this, the earlier start and the earlier release. I don't like or love the idea of a scheduled last day of school that's June 30th. That just seems, I know it's with 5 school days, with 5 snow days, but yeah, I don't think that people enjoyed that this past year. Yeah, that's my only main. I assume that I tried to compare with different religious holiday schedules. I know we've tried to work around as many as we can in the past. I assume that you've designed for that here. I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a hard one, you know. So one of the things that we had a group of Jewish students that met with us a couple of years ago, if you remember. So one thing that we do is the first day of every month, we send out 2 different religious calendars. One's from Drexel University, and I can't remember the other one, so that people are aware of religious holidays, all religious holidays, whether they're days of obligation or fasting, because we do have a diverse community that celebrates lots of different holidays. You know, I think where we tried to do, and I will double check this on this calendar, so it's a good reminder, is what we've done is try to capture at least one of the days of the high holidays, at the first day of Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, and I don't know if we've done that on this one, so I appreciate it because it's late in September, actually, now that I think about it, and that's
It's
not
not
what I
here.
Yeah, so what we've tried to do is do an early release day on one of those. That was a suggestion that students came up with a couple years ago, and we can make that adjustment on the calendar. So, Mr. Demling, thank you for raising that. And we got mostly positive feedback, but did get some negative feedback from some staff members who missed some professional development that they would have liked to have done this year. So it is like this really hard situation of, it's still work that the majority of the district will move on, but the more religious holidays we take off, I'm actually quite fine, more than most, frankly, of taking off lots of religious holidays and starting the school year way earlier than almost anyone else is comfortable, because I think summer break is really long. And if you think about the opportunity gap that we have, the summer vacation is the place where it grows the longest. However, I'm highly aware that I'm in the minority of people who would really like a sort of mid-August start and more days off or breaks in the school year. That's a real hardship for families who need to work on those days. And so it's trying to balance those variables. But I appreciate you raising it, and we'll make sure and look at the calendar on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur and change that first early release day to make sure it captures one of those two.
I would say you're probably not the only one, because I was, that's where my head was going about starting earlier, because I shared Mr. Demling's concern about a June 30th, last day of school. And I also think June 22nd is very late also. We might, global warming, we may not have as many snow days. I don't know, but I don't want, we use those for things other than snow as well. So I don't know if it's feasible to even look at, I wouldn't presume to go back even, a whole week, but is there any way that sort of we can inch it a little, start on the Wednesday, and that only gets us one day, but if we don't have 5 snow days, that could be significant. But I do feel like June 22nd is also very late. And there's fewer day camp opportunities for little kids in August anyway. So the hardship for families is sort of, I don't know which is more challenging. So Dr. Morris.
Yeah, and that's something we could definitely bring up. I do plan to get feedback again from the APA, and something that we could look to see if we can, even that one day, it still has the majority of staff starting that week. It's a Monday instead of a Tuesday that they would start. And I think in terms of global warming, not my area of expertise, but I think Mr. Sullivan could tell you that bad ice storms contribute at least as much, if not more, to snow days or difficult roads, especially in our communities that don't have all the roads paved. And those, I am concerned about the trend we've seen the last couple of years of the ice that doesn't go away. And then also what it does in spring when it melts to the roads in our communities. So I didn't put you on the spot, Mr. Sullivan, but we have a lot of offline conversations about the roads in Shutesbury, and I don't think global warming is going to do anything good for those roads.
Sorry. Okay. I think you have what you need for on the calendar. Okay. And so our next item is vendor policy. And this is a second read. When we reviewed this at our last conversation, we didn't have any new edits to make beyond what's already sort of redlined in this draft that's attached to the agenda. And just as a reminder, this is a policy that requires that would require any vendor in our district to demonstrate their commitment to diversity. And it's a pretty short policy, but like I said, there were no changes since the first read. Any questions? I think as the policy subcommittee is meeting on Monday evening. One of the things that we'll need to do is come up with the name for this and the letters. So that will be done before we actually publish it, if we choose to vote on that tonight. Mr. Stammel.
So a picky question, comment, being an older guy. when grammatically, when you say the superintendent in their judgment, is that how there is now used? You can't say his or her. You say
There.
because
Yes.
there is the proper.
Yes.
Yeah, just have to throw out a lot of what I learned as an English major. Okay.
Other comments, Mr. Harrington?
Yeah, I just have a clarifying question that I'm certain I know the answer to. I just want to make sure that I know the answer to. But here's this part: based on availability of such and within fiscal requirements as publicly funded organizations. So this won't affect the procurement process. Like, this is saying that we will follow the lines of the procurement process, right? As long as the vendor is within that. Okay, just making sure.
Good question. Any other questions? Seeing none, I will move that we approve the policy as presented. In contracting with vendors committed to cultural diversity.
Second.
Moved by McDonald and seconded by Stammel. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Demling?
Just a quick note, we said this last time, but this is quite the common policy in a number of organizations. It's great that we're doing it, but it's not anything radical, right? This is and it's totally in line with our mission. So I think we had more comments last time when we expressed reasons why we were supporting this, but since sometimes you only tune into one meeting and you're wondering why people aren't saying anything, it's because it's all been said before. But I just that one item I just thought was bear repeating.
Yep, thank you. So we'll move to a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, I.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, I.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Mr. Stammel?
Stammel, aye.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Sullivan, aye.
And Donald, aye. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And future agenda planning. We are next meeting in 2 weeks, which is October 26th. And that meeting we'll come back to vote on adding 6th grade to the middle school. We'll vote on the superintendent goals, hopefully ratifying the contracts with the UFCW and APAA unions. Come back to the calendar and vote, and we'll also be getting an update on the 4th quarter of my 21 budget, so last year, and an update on the 1st quarter of this year's budget and a rural schools grant. And it looks like potentially coming back. Nope, sorry. live editing. We'll have an executive session to approve the remaining executive session minutes that we didn't get to at our last executive session. So it sounds like a lot, but a lot of them are votes of second reads and things that we've discussed either tonight or prior conversations. So I'm comfortable that will fill our 2.5 hours. Any questions, Mr. Demling?
So this, based on, if this is too busy of a meeting, doesn't have to be for next meeting, but talk just briefly about how we want to publish our draft minutes for meetings. It's not just about, where we do it, but since we have this opportunity now with the new website, where they might be able to be available much earlier, and do we want to do that or not, and pros and cons?
Great. Dr. Morris added that we're going to come back to an update on the pooled testing, National Guard, use of the National Guard for that at the October 26th. So if you're okay, Mr. Demling, pushing that to November, the November 9th meeting. Okay. Excellent. Warrant report is next up, and Ms. Spitzer, looks like your warrants are attached to the agenda.
They are, though. I've noted that often, like I have a third one, so I don't know. Yes, I'm going to read 3. So
okay.
All right. I assume I still need to read them even though they're attached. So I, Carrie Spitzer, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $758,578.86 for the warrant dated October 7th, 2021. This included general fund expenses of $757,777.25 and grant fund expenses of $801.61. And I signed this on October 8th, 2021. I, Carrie Spitzer, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $206,091.23 for the warrant dated October 1st, 2021. This included general fund expenses of $194,353.23, revolving fund expenses of $8,788.70, and grant fund expenses of $12,876.80, and other funds in the amount of $72.50 for capital, and this was signed on October 1st, 2021. I, Carrie Spitzer, authorized by my signature to a scholarship warrant in the amount of $1,000 for the warrant dated September 29th, 2021. This included other funds in the same amount, $1,000, and I was signed it on 9/30/2021. I have a question. Is the full warrant visible for the public with for the scholarship one? And the third page of it includes some details that might be.
It doesn't look like it. It looks like it's just the signature page.
Yep. And I know Dr. Slaughter did communicate with legal counsel about that. So I would encourage you just to shoot an email. Dr. Slaughter's out today and tomorrow, but he can fill you in on kind of the legal parts of that, but it's not visible. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Several questions here. Ms. Stancer?
So I'm curious. I see nothing attached under warrant report. Am I supposed to? Because I've looked both on my computer and my iPad, and I'm not seeing anything. And I also am not seeing the minutes. I didn't see the attached minutes.
So I'm noticing that the warrants are actually executive content. So the only way that anybody can see it is if they are logged in and have that visibility, permissions visibility. So the warrants. In other school committees, we don't attach the warrants in the agenda, but I think it's a question I think that we can take offline. With the minutes, you'd have to be logged in order to be able to see that. So if you're not seeing them, then you're probably not logged in as you and just viewing the public site. Are you've read all of your warrants? Yeah, okay. And just to close the loop, Ms. Stancer, that this is the comment that Mr. Demling asked us to put on the agenda for November 9th on the minutes, public visibility. But school committee members have logins to board docs and are able to see additional content that the public is not able to see, such as executive content. Next, we have some gifts. Mr. Demling?
So I just had a question on the warrants.
Okay.
So very briefly, because we were on the warrants, there was an interesting discussion last week on the MASC listserv about consent agendas, and it seemed like a number of school committees don't read out their warrants the way we do. And so I know we did this change recently because of legal advice we got, but it doesn't seem to be something that every school committee does. So I just wondering if you're already going to be talking to Dr. Slaughter about clarifying the legal requirements around warrants. It might be worth just verifying that and seeing why some committees do it or don't.
Yeah, my understanding was, because I saw that thread also, my understanding was that they don't have a single person that's authorized to sign the warrants, and that what they're doing is actually signing the warrants in the consent agenda. Is that
makes sense. Thank
Dr.
you.
Morris nodding his head? So yeah, that would have been the way we could have done it when we chose to authorize one individual. Okay. Gifts. I keep opening and reopening the same thing. I will move that we accept the following donations from MIAA number 27821 to support American Rescue Plan for after-school programs for hosting 2021 spring tournaments tennis boys in the amount of $200. And a grant from Project Bread, number 201319342, to support 2021 Breakfast Back to School grant in the amount of $5,200. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by McDonald, seconded by Spitzer. Any discussion? Take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, I.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, I.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Mr. Stammel?
Stammel, aye.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Sullivan, aye.
And McDonald, aye. The motion passes unanimously. And I will now move that the committee enters executive session in accordance with the open meeting law, MGL C30A, section 21A, to conduct collective bargaining sessions related to an APEA grievance and to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares, and I declare, with no intention of returning to open session. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Moved by McDonald, seconded by Spitzer. We'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling?
Demling, aye.
Mr. Harrington?
Harrington, aye.
Ms. Kenny?
Kenny, I.
Ms. Lord?
Lord, I.
Ms. Spitzer?
Spitzer, aye.
Mr. Stammel?
Stammel, aye.
Ms. Stancer?
Stancer, aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Sullivan, aye.
And McDonald, aye. We will now adjourn to executive session.